White Star should have set up its own wireless instead of the Marconi telegraph office. The Marconi operators had no experience with icebergs. Captain Smith or Titanic's officers should at least have instructed them on proper procedures. Messages number 8 at 9:40 p.m. and number 9 at 11:05 p.m. were of critical importance but never reached the bridge. Titanic's officers on the bridge should have regularly checked the Marconi office on their own initiative. Titanic's officers did not have earlier warnings but knew the ice hazard lay ahead. There's the unsinkable Molly Brown right here. Collision imminent straight ahead. At 11:40 p.m., Titanic had only 2 lookouts on watch, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee. High up on the mast of the crow's nest, Fleet spotted a huge black shadow. He gave 3 rings of the crow's nest bell and shouted his immortal words, "Iceberg right ahead." Titanic was steaming at full speed directly towards the huge iceberg. First Officer Murdoch ordered the engines reversed and the wheel to be turned hard starboard. Tragically, these 2 commands were counterproductive. Reversing the 3 engines almost eliminated the steering effectiveness of the Titanic's single rudder. Experienced captains have said it would have been better for the Titanic to strike the berg straight on. Instead, after 37 seconds, the Titanic glanced along the side of the iceberg and sustained a long gash below the waterline. This popped the rivets, breaking in the steel plate and causing massive leakage. That damage, which caused hardly any noticeable impact to those on board, was a death blow to the ship. How it looked at the bottom of the ocean. Captain Smith realistically accepted the fact that his ship would not remain afloat. With no ship nearby and the freezing temperature of the sea, he knew that well over half the people on the Titanic were likely to die. It was to Captain Smith's credit that he quickly accepted the bitter conclusion. Given his earlier attitude, he might have refused to believe the worst and avoided taking action. Instead, within 20 minutes of the collision, at about midnight, Captain Smith ordered wireless operator Phillips to send out a distress signal. Phillips sent CQD, the distress signal used by the Marconi Company, followed by MGY, the wireless call sign for the Titanic. The SOS signal was sent 2 hours later. These are the Morse code symbols for what they sent. Distress signal. The passengers had not the slightest idea the ship was doomed. Most believed evacuation was foolishness, especially because the lights stayed on, and at first there was no change in the level of the decks. Most passengers were not convinced that they were in danger. Most still believed and reassured one another that the Titanic could not possibly sink. Many passengers thought getting into the boats was only a precaution and not a matter of life or death. Gradually, the gravity of the situation became apparent. Concern and even panic began to spread. In conducting the evacuation, the captain and officers were far from organized, confident, or convincing. The fact that most lifeboats were only partially filled raised further uncertainty about the urgency of getting aboard. That made full loading more difficult. Captain Smith and the Titanic's officers certainly knew that failure to fully fill the boats would have severely worsened the already serious shortage of lifeboats. Disorganized loading of the lifeboats. Finally, at 12:25 a.m., loading of the lifeboats began. It was a slow and confused process. Few of the officers and crew and none of the passengers had any lifeboat drills. No passengers had been given lifeboat assignments. After another 20-minute delay, the first lifeboat, number 7, which could have carried 65, was lowered with only 28 people on board. Many passengers were reluctant to leave the apparent safety of the huge ship for a 70-foot drop in a wooden boat down to the cold, dark ocean. Many women did not want to leave their husbands, and some had been forcibly put into a lifeboat on the port side of the Titanic. Only women and children were permitted in lifeboats 90 feet away on the starboard side. If no women and children were there, men were allowed to get into the boat. As the concern mounted, there are many dreadful questions reported to be confronting many on board. What can I possibly do? Are my family and I going to survive? If I don't, how will they get along? How will I say goodbye? Am I ready to die? What last message can I leave, and how can I send it? There's a sextant. Reproduction. 1500 souls depart. The Cunard liner Carpathia had heard the Titanic's wireless plea, "Come at once, we have struck an iceberg," and without hesitation turned toward Titanic. Running sometimes at full speed, about 19 knots, and carefully maneuvering in the dark through 58 miles of iceberg-studded waters, she arrived in just 4 hours, too late to help anyone other than those in the lifeboats. It took 4 hours, but the Carpathia brought all 706 Titanic survivors on board. A search for more survivors found none. Those who had died in their life jackets had drifted away. Arthur Rostron, Carpathia's captain, ordered her flag lowered at half-mast. 2 memorial services were held, a thanksgiving for the 706 who had been rescued and funeral service for those who had died. 13 of Titanic's lifeboats were taken aboard, and 3 of the rescued who died of exposure were buried at sea. So the captain of the Carpathia responded to the Titanic's distress signals. It was extremely brave and noble of Captain Rostron of the crew of the Cunard's Carpathia to proceed in the dark through the ice-dotted waters to attempt the rescue of the Titanic, owned by White Star, a bitter rival, which was intending to bring ruin to the Cunard line. It is legitimate to speculate whether White Star's Ismay and Captain Smith on the Titanic would have been so gallant if the situation were reversed. Given their intention to break the speed record, Titanic might have done what the other J.P. Morgan Leyland line ship, the nearby Californian, did: keep right on sailing. For over 2 hours, every porthole and saloon was blazing with light. As Titanic slipped beneath the waves, the lights went out, flashed on once more, and went out for good. Here's a section about the iceberg. This is an amazing model here. The iceberg that sank the Titanic is thought to have calved off a Greenland glacier in the late 1910 or early 1911. After traveling south for over a year in the cold Labrador Current, in April 1912 it drifted into the path of the RMS Titanic. April 15th, 1912, the final plunge. All kinds of literature. "868 survivors." This has been a pretty amazing display exhibit. And here we are at the beginning again. And that's it. Entering the Exxon Mobile Oil and Gas Gallery. Nautilus survival suit. Here it is here. Helicopter abandonment immersion suit. People traveling to an offshore production facility must pass a very intensive survival training course because an emergency at sea or on a rig is unlike any situation encountered on land. Suits like this are worn by every person traveling to and from Hibernia. And Hibernia is an oil field, and an oil platform in that field is named Hibernia as well, just off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland. Every person traveling to and from Hibernia in a helicopter. This suit is very well equipped to deal with an emergency. The safety apparatus attached to the suit includes a personal locator beacon, water-activated lights, a whistle, and a buddy line used to keep people close to each other in the water, and inflatable mitts for greater thermal protection. Helicopter and abandonment immersion suit. Here's some more gear. Some products made from oil and gas. Even a toilet seat and an M&M sitting in the seat. What are oil and gas? Oil and gas that occur naturally in the earth are sometimes called crude oil and natural gas. They are also called petroleum. The word petroleum derives its name from the Latin word petra, which means rock, and oleum, which means oil, rock oil. Oil and gas are mostly made of molecules called hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbon molecules consist of hydrogen and carbon atoms bounded together. Oil and gas are mixtures of different hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons made of small molecules are gases at room temperature and pressure. Those made of slightly bigger molecules are liquids, and those made of large molecules are solids. And here is a bit about methane gas and octane. Hydrocarbon molecule size. Using the knobs, tilt the 3 samples of hydrocarbons in the cylinders. Notice how the light oil on the top runs more easily than the heavy oil bottom. This is because light oil is made out of smaller hydrocarbon molecules. Here is a cross-section of the Hibernia oil field. Complex folding and faulting of the rocks have created many different oil and gas traps in the rich Hibernia oil field. This simplified cross-section shows some of the structurally separated oil and gas reservoirs. Sandstone, shale, fractured granite. Oh, hello. how do we find oil and gas? We know how crude oil and natural gas form, but how do we know where to look for the rocks that contain them? Learning about the surface geology is one of the first steps in finding oil and gas. Oil and gas form in thick stacks of sedimentary rocks found in sedimentary basins. These start out as depressions in the earth where loose sediments collect. As the sediments build up, the pressure turns the loose sediment into sedimentary rock. Sedimentary basins can be found and their depth and extent estimated from regional geological and geophysical surveys. Now I'm noticing that this exhibit about ExxonMobil, the ExxonMobil platform, and the Hibernia oil fields is leaving out any effects on the environment or any of the negative things about oil, like the Ocean Ranger disaster in 1984, the offshore drilling unit that sank just offshore of St. John's, which would be appropriate for an exhibit in St. John's to mention. It had 84 crew members on board when it sank, and there were no survivors. But if you want to see a monument to those who died, it's on the grounds of the Confederation Building in St. John's, capital of Newfoundland.
From the Hibernia platform, many wells are converted. Using advanced technology, we can drill sideways into different reservoirs. We use additional injection wells to pump water and gas down to the reservoirs, forcing oil out of production wells. The Hibernia field started production in 1997.
Once crude oil and natural gas are found, scientists and engineers must determine the overall size of the reservoir, the volume of oil and natural gas that can be extracted, and how difficult it is to extract. This involves drilling appraisal wells and possibly acquiring more seismic data to aid in determining the exact shape and size of the reservoir.
Here's an oil rig. There's the tip of a drill right there. Drill bit.
Supply base. Offshore oil and gas developments require substantial facilities onshore to provide warehouses, workshops, and storage for the large variety of materials used in drilling and production. Supply vessels travel to and from these supply bases to offshore drilling and production facilities like Hibernia to keep them operating efficiently. In St. John's Harbor, the most used supply base is operated by A. Harvey and Company Limited, which has been in the marine services business since 1865. The Maersk supply vessels tie up there to load food and supplies like drilling mud stored in the Harvey dockside towers.
Here's the other side of the oil rig platform. Rumpelstiltskins. Rumpelstiltskins, Good Times Eatery. So I'll show you the accommodations, the summer accommodations they have here at the Memorial University. This is one of the buildings. This is the building I'm in. It's called Hatcher House. It's on the McPherson campus, or residences. Food services, level 2. It's all closed though for the summer. Tunnel access, level 1. You can get rooms with one double bed or a room with 2 single beds. Single beds give you more space. The double bed is very small. You get cupboards, a desk over here, and a shelf up here, shelves, more shelves, a rack, towel rack. More shelves. This is the view. There's that overpass that went over. So those are the rooms.